The cop wasn't there to arrest him, he was there to execute him. Daisy saw the cruiser lights flash across the windows and recognized Detective Miller immediately. Corrupt, violent, and bought by men worse than the criminals he chased. The Mafia boss at her counter was bleeding out, one hand on his gun, ready to turn her empty diner into a battlefield. But Daisy moved first. She scrubbed blood off the floor, locked him in the pantry, and served coffee like nothing had happened. Let us examine this tragic opening frame together, shall we? The camera opens at 2:43 in the morning, where sirens bleed red and blue across rain-slick diner glass. Inside this fluorescent purgatory stands Daisy Gallagher, a phantom pouring black coffee to survive crushing family debts. But you and I know the cruel irony of destiny. Out of the storm, a bleeding syndicate kingpin collapses into her sanctuary. Hunted by a dirty badge, blinded by panic, Daisy lies to the law to shield this monster. It is an irreversible miscalculation. By dawn, the cold truth settles in. He remembers her face. The profound lesson is unavoidable. Whenever we try to shrink away from the world simply kicks the door down, reminding us that true safety is merely a fragile illusion. The lens pans across Higgins' diner, capturing a portrait of urban decay. The air hangs heavy with the scent of burnt grease, bitter coffee, and harsh bleach. Daisy is 24, but the merciless graveyard shift has begun to hollow out her youth. Her hair is pulled back in a fraying knot, her cheap blue uniform stained by midnight patrons. Observe the exhaustion, weighing down her shoulders as she scrubs the counter, her hollow eyes locked on the ticking clock. 3 agonizing hours remain before she can ride a freezing bus to see her younger brother, Leo, at the care ward. Her silent agony reveals a haunting truth about devotion. When we truly love someone, we willingly bleed our own spirits dry, carrying the most crushing burdens simply to ensure they see another sunrise. She is attempting to empty an ocean of medical debts with a fractured teacup. It is a tragic war, yet the only purpose keeping her breathing. The diner is a hollow cavern, swallowed by drumming rain and the hum of dying refrigerators. Daisy floats in a waking nightmare, mechanically wiping a shattered mug, until the door chime violently shatters the silence. Freezing air tears through the room, sending white napkins dancing across the linoleum like dying moths. She lifts her head, and her polite greeting turns to ash in her throat. The imposing silhouette standing in the doorway does not belong in this purgatory. It serves as a brutal reminder of reality. Catastrophe never waits for us to find our footing. It kicks the door off its hinges precisely when we are already drowning. The camera lingers on the intruder, a man chiseled from unforgiving marble. He is a looming shadow, radiating a lethal stillness that overpowers the storm. He wears a bespoke charcoal suit, worth more than Daisy earns in 5 years of broken sleep. Yet, it is not the display of wealth that freezes her blood. It is the tragic angle of his broken posture. He slumps against the rusted doorframe, his trembling hand pressing a ruined silk handkerchief against his ribs. "Stay with me here?" Because this frame changes everything. This exact second teaches a stark truth about our fragile mortality. No matter the empires you build or the sheer terror you command, every single one of us bleeds the exact same shade of crimson when the ghosts of our past finally come to collect their toll. The silk fabric is destroyed, saturated in thick black blood. With every agonizing breath, a fresh wave slips past his trembling fingers, staining the linoleum Daisy just scrubbed. He locks his predatory eyes onto hers and demands a coffee. His voice is a metallic growl, steeped in an Italian accent and absolute authority. Daisy stands paralyzed, trapped in the gravity of a sudden tragedy. Every instinct screams at her to smash the silent alarm, knowing bleeding men in tailored suits only drag innocent people into the grave. She barely stammers a plea for an ambulance. Here lies a profound lesson about the primal warnings of our souls. When your intuition begs you to flee, you must obey. Ignoring those quiet alarms is how we willingly walk into the jaws of a total nightmare. He pins her in place with a stare so cold it stops the breath in her lungs. It is the dead-eyed focus of an apex predator, cornered in the dark. Not a fraction of panic fractures his face, only a glacial calculation, even as his blood pools around his shoes. In a lethal whisper, he commands her to forget the medics and pour the drink. Daisy swallows the lump of terror in her throat. She recognizes this darkness. It is the exact void she saw in the loan sharks who broke her father years ago. It is the stare of a man who trades in blood, not negotiations. It serves as a bitter reminder about survival. True bravery is rarely a loud act of defiance. Sometimes, the smartest defense is silencing your pride, reading the shadows, and doing whatever it takes to simply outlast the violent storm. Watch closely as the camera tightens on this agonizing sequence. The wounded Titan drags his broken body toward the counter, each step a visible battle against the dark. He collapses onto a cracked stool, cold sweat gleaming on his pale face. As his coat falls open, Daisy catches the dull gleam of a heavy pistol strapped to his ribs. Her heart hammers a violent rhythm against her sternum. With shaking hands, she slides the steaming mug across the scratchy surface. He does not flinch. With a bloody hand, he unclasps a platinum watch and slams it onto the counter, buying her silence. It is a masterful, tragic display of raw willpower. Even as we bleed out, projecting an unbreakable facade of absolute authority, is often the only armor left to keep the approaching wolves at bay. He holds her terrified gaze, dictating the laws of this twisted reality. He will drink his coffee, and she will play the bored waitress. If asked, he has been eating cherry pie for an hour. Daisy stands paralyzed, her eyes tracking the gruesome crimson trail across the tiles. But you and I are about to see the true horror of this narrative. A grim smile ghosts across his lips as he whispers the fatal twist. It was the police who shot him. Before Daisy can swallow that terrifying revelation, blinding strobe lights cut through the rain. Red and blue flashes wash over her face as a cruiser tears into the lot. It is a devastating reflection on systemic trust. When the shields meant to protect the innocent become the predators, we are tragically forced to become our own moral compass. In a heartbeat, his exhaustion is erased, replaced by the terrifying clarity of a cornered beast. The camera drops to show his blood-slicked fingers wrapping around the cold grip of his hidden firearm. The diner and the trembling girl fade. His universe narrows to the rain-streaked glass door. You can feel the dark, lethal mathematics behind his eyes. He is ready to die, taking souls with him, right here on the floor. He barks a command to stay out of sight, his frame coiled tight. Daisy risks a desperate glance through the window, dread wrapping around her throat as two shadows emerge into the freezing storm. It teaches us a powerful truth about resilience. When finally pushed into an inescapable corner, the sheer will to survive makes us infinitely stronger than those who hunt us. The yellow streetlights cut through the downpour, illuminating the lead shadow. It is Detective Harrison Miller. A wave of absolute dread crashes into Daisy's chest. Miller is a legendary rot in this city, moving through desperate neighborhoods like a shark in shallow water. He acts as a sanctioned hitman. If Miller is stalking this kingpin, there are no handcuffs in his pockets. He is here to dig a grave. Daisy realizes, with sickening clarity, that if bullets start flying, she is just tragic collateral. Miller leaves no breathing witnesses. A suffocating panic grips her lungs, but a primal will to live forcefully takes the wheel. It shows us exactly how to wield our terror. Paralyzing fear is a death sentence. To survive the darkness, you must ignite that panic and burn it as the fuel that pushes you forward. Daisy's eyes dart to the door, measuring the suffocating timeline. She whispers a frantic warning that Miller is not making an arrest. He is here to bury them both. The mobster's stony mask cracks with shock, and he gruffly commands her to escape out the back. But Daisy is playing a dangerous game. She sharply reminds him that alley cameras would seal their doom, then bolts from the safety of the counter. Why risk her life for a criminal? Stick with me, because her reasoning is deeply tragic. Her mind flashes to her brother Leo. If she dies on this floor, he is lost to the system. It illuminates a tear-jerking truth. When your soul is tethered to someone who desperately needs you, that profound love will forge you into a weapon of unimaginable courage. Daisy grips the uninjured arm of the bleeding stranger, finding his muscles like cast iron beneath the shredded wool of his coat. She whispers, a frantic demand to move. He hesitates, his dark eyes searching her pale face for any shadow of betrayal, before an agonizing groan tears from his throat. He forces his ruined body off the booth. Daisy hauls his massive frame behind the counter, pushing him into the shadows. Snatching a damp mop, she frantically smears soapy water across the violent trail of crimson, blurring it into a ghostly pink on the white tiles. She shoves him toward the heavy steel pantry door. It is a vital lesson for any tragedy. When the world collapses, perfection becomes the enemy of progress. You must embrace the messy, bloody reality and simply fight to survive. Let us step into this suffocating darkness together, shall we? Picture a pitch-black pantry, heavy with the scent of raw onions and stale flour. Daisy breathes a warning to remain still, knowing any sound means execution, but the bleeding man in the shadows is no victim. He leans close, his voice a gravelly snarl, promising that if she betrays him, he will end her before the law crosses the threshold. She slams the metal door, sealing a ticking time bomb inside the vault. Wiping blood from her hands, she grabs a coffee pot, just as the front entrance violently bursts open. Detective Harrison Miller steps into the harsh neon glow in a soaked trench coat, his cruel eyes darting like a starved predator. The lesson is unavoidable. The demons we lock in our own dark rooms are always deadlier than the wolves scratching at the front door. The tragedy deepens as a trembling rookie steps behind the corrupted detective. He felt like a terror child holding a shield. Miller abandons any pretense of public servitude. His wet boots squeal against the cheap linoleum, a deliberate, agonizing sound as he stalks the diner for a trace of guilt. Daisy throws a mental switch, burying her panic behind the empty smile of a late-night waitress. She pours a steaming mug of coffee with steady hands, even as her pulse batters violently against her ribs. Miller ignores the drink. He invades her space, leaning over the counter, radiating the suffocating smell of wet wool and stale tobacco. It forces us to confront a harsh reality about human corruption. The worst monsters do not lurk in the shadows. They stand boldly in the light, cloaked entirely in the authority of a silver badge. Miller tightens the psychological vice, demanding to know who passed through these fading doors. Daisy plays her part beautifully, offering a bored shrug, claiming it has just been her and the storm since midnight. But a veteran predator is rarely thrown off the scent. His dead eyes drop to the freshly mopped tiles, locking onto a faint pink smear near a stool. His tone drops into a menacing hum as he asks why she is scrubbing floors in an empty room. Leaning into the overworked waitress routine, she forces a tired laugh and blames a random drunk, knowing her boss would steal her tips if the place was a mess. She survives this interrogation because of a fundamental truth. You must build your psychological armor long before the enemy steps onto your battlefield. Still, Miller leaves his thick fingers drumming the cracked counter, utterly unconvinced. The suffocating silence in the diner becomes a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Miller pauses in front of the dark back hallway, the exact threshold separating his corrupt authority from the bleeding crime lord hidden in the dark. Resting a hand casually on his holster, the detective mentions they are hunting a wounded man in a ruined suit. Daisy refuses to let her trembling body betray her mind. She aggressively scrubs a stain on the counter, dismissing him by saying this side of town only gets broke students and exhausted truck drivers. Unmoved, Miller snaps his fingers, sending his young partner to sweep the back rooms. Ice floods her veins as the heavy boots march past her. This moment teaches a critical lesson about facing absolute disaster. When the world demands your collapse, you must plant your feet. Flinching is the only way you truly lose. Daisy grips the cracked edge of the counter. With such agonizing force, her knuckles turn completely white. She clearly envisions the violent tragedy waiting to unfold. If that nervous rookie swings open the heavy metal door, the cornered Mafia boss will unleash a hail of bullets, and Miller will slaughter everyone left standing. Every passing second is pure psychological torture. She tracks the rookie's heavy footsteps as he bangs through the restroom and rattles the small office. When he stops at the pantry, demanding to know what is inside, Daisy weaponizes her tone. She projects the hollow irritation of an underpaid worker, yelling that it is just flour, and he has to yank the broken handle hard. We take a vital piece of wisdom from her survival. When the world is burning to ash around you, a coldly calculated mind becomes your greatest possible shield. A sharp, metallic slam echoes down the hallway as the rookie forces the latch incorrectly, jamming the door exactly as Daisy manipulated him to do. He mutters a curse about the broken handle, and Miller finally lets his thin patience snap. The detective barks that a bleeding man hiding in a flower closet would have left a glaring trail, declaring, "They are wasting time." The rookie clears the hall, but the predator lingers. Miller locks Daisy in a hollow stare, leaning close enough to promise that, if she is protecting someone, a docked paycheck will be the absolute least of her suffering. Daisy simply lowers her chin, playing the harmless, intimidated girl to cinematic perfection. It reveals a brilliant, unwritten law of power dynamics. Sometimes, feeding an enemy the illusion of your own weakness is the most dominant move you can possibly make. Growling about chasing ghosts, the corrupted men finally step back out into the freezing downpour. Daisy tracks the red tail lights of their cruiser through the smeared glass until they dissolve into the storm. Only then does the adrenaline abandon her trembling body. She collapses against the counter, shoving a shaking hand over her mouth to muffle a desperate sob. She just gambled her life against a ruthless detective to harbor a syndicate killer. She forces herself to wait on that dirty floor for 5 agonizing minutes, ensuring the wolves do not circle back. When she pushes herself up, her legs feel completely hollowed out, like brittle glass. Look closely at this tragedy, and you will find a profound truth. True courage is never the absence of fear. It is feeling absolutely terrified and still taking the exact steps required to survive the night. Daisy throws her exhausted body weight against the jammed door, dragging it open with a tortured screech. Inside the pitch-black pantry, the wounded boss is slumped over a sack of flour, his heavy pistol leveled directly at her chest. The second he realizes it is the waitress, the weapon drops from his grip, and a ragged breath escapes his failing lungs. Stripped of adrenaline, the man looks like walking death, his proud face drained to the color of wet cement. She warns him the police are gone, but will inevitably return. He attempts to stand, but his ruined leg betrays him. He collapses backward into the metal shelving, sending canned goods crashing across the floor in a chaotic mess. Life has a brutal, poetic way of reminding us of the simple reality. No matter how high you build your emotional walls, a day always comes when you need another person to pull you up. You and I both know how the darkness strips away our carefully crafted masks. The fallen boss curses in bitter Italian, his pale hands clamped over his bleeding side. Daisy knows her safest move is to walk away, but human empathy is a heavy anchor. She hauls his agonizing weight over her shoulder, dragging him toward a plastic chair in the dim break room. When she returns with a dusty first aid kit, he has stripped away his ruined, bespoke jacket. Beneath the blood-soaked silk, his torso is a brutal map of jagged silver tissue. He has survived a lifetime of violent betrayals and quiet wars. Yet Daisy forces her eyes onto the fresh, ragged hole tearing through his pale flesh. The lesson here is quiet, but profoundly true. You can read the entire, unspoken tragedy of a person's life simply by studying the deep scars they so desperately try to keep hidden. The stranger forces out a grunt, claiming the bullet passed clean through, missing his vital organs. Daisy snaps right back, asking if getting shot suddenly earned him a medical degree. That biting sarcasm is a fragile shield, her mind flipping into a cold survival state to avoid breaking down. He falls silent, letting his dark eyes burn intensely into hers. Without warning, she opens a bottle of harsh antiseptic, directly into the open flesh. The proud man refuses to give her a single scream, but his jaw clamps down so hard the violent tension echoes in the tiny room. She frantically packs the raw, agonizing wound with rough cotton gauze. Left with only diner supplies, she grabs a roll of silver duct tape to tightly bind his torn flesh together. Life teaches us this raw truth. When destiny strips away your elegant choices, you survive by weaponizing whatever is right in front of you. Notice the silence as the wounded man stares at the cheap silver tape, holding his torn flesh together. A raspy note of respect scratches his throat. Daisy snaps the adhesive, telling him it will hold just long enough for an underground surgeon. Stepping back, the suffocating reality crashes over her. The room reeks of warm copper blood and dark sandalwood. He tilts his chin, the harsh light catching his eyes, demanding to know why she saved his life. She fires back, desperate to hide her shaking hands, claiming she simply refused to mop up his corpse. You and I know the tragic truth here. Sometimes, the only way to protect a fragile heart is to look a monster in the eye and convince him you do not care about anything at all. She holds her ground, chin tilted, in fierce defiance, swearing she barely makes enough to scrub Syndicate remains off the faded linoleum. A low, gravelly chuckle vibrates from the wounded man. It is a hollow sound that sends an icy shiver racing down her spine. Slowly, he forces his battered frame upright, every muscle corded with pain. Reaching into his coat, he pulls out a thick money clip. He peels off a stack of $100 bills, the edges stained a deep red from his own wounds, and tosses them onto the table to pay for her ruined mop. Daisy recoils, demanding he step back out into the freezing rain. The shadows of the room teach a harsh, necessary truth. Taking a favor from a dangerous man is exactly like swallowing a rusted fishhook. You never take the bait. Daisy pleads with him to vanish, desperate to erase this bloody nightmare. The injured predator slowly buttons his ruined shirt, dragging his weight toward the alley exit. Right before pushing this heavy door, he freezes. The flickering red glow of the neon sign bleeds across his jawline, carving violent shadows into his skin. His dark eyes drop to the cheap plastic tag on her chest, Daisy Gallagher. He tastes her name out loud, rolling the syllables with a terrifying elegance that hovers between a sacred vow and a death sentence. Men like him never forget a debt, he murmurs, and he owes her his life. He steps out, swallowed by the freezing storm. The darkest lesson is plain to see. The absolute worst thing you can earn in this unforgiving world is the eternal gratitude of a ruthless killer. Daisy stands alone in the hollow break room, deafened by the echoes of the night. Her hands violently shake as she scoops up those blood-stained $100 bills and shoves them into her apron. Why accept such dirty money? Because her little brother Leo is suffocating in a hospital bed, needing medication to survive. We must swallow a bitter truth here. Spotless morality is a luxury meant only for the safe. When someone you love is hanging by a thread, survival becomes your only religion. She spends the darkest hours on her aching knees, scrubbing the trauma from the cracked tiles. By 6 a.m, the floor reeks of harsh bleach instead of warm blood. Her greasy manager Higgins barges through the door, immediately screaming about the chemical stench, totally blind to the brutal nightmare she just survived. Let us take a closer look together. You and I both know the crushing weight of a thankless existence. Daisy stands perfectly still, letting this petty boss tear her apart, threatening to dock her paycheck for using too much cleaner. Her bones feel like lead after a sleepless night. The brutal bloodbath from hours ago is already warping into a sickening fever dream. All she wants is to grab her worn purse and run to her little brother. Swallowing her pride, she mutters an apology and leaves Higgins hovering over his pathetic ledger. She steps out into the biting winter wind, wrapping her jacket tightly over her chest, dragging her exhausted soul toward the morning bus. The quiet tragedy teaches us something vital. Some days, finding the inner strength to just walk away without breaking down is the greatest victory you can ask for. She barely makes it down the frozen sidewalk before a heavy tremor vibrates through the pavement. Daisy turns slowly, her stomach plummeting into pure terror. Gliding into the crumbling diner parking lot are 4 pitch-black vehicles, their windows tinted like thick polished obsidian. The massive machines whip into a flawless, predatory semicircle, instantly choking off every escape route. Morning traffic screeches to a sudden halt. Innocent bystanders scatter into the alleyways because the city intuitively knows the scent of approaching violence. The heavy doors unlatch in chilling synchronization. 12 imposing, lethally disciplined figures step onto the cold asphalt. The lesson of the street is painted right in front of us. When unchecked, absolute power arrives at your doorstep. Your only real chance of survival is to fade quietly into the shadows. Observe the chilling poetry of their movement. These are disciplined soldiers draped in immaculate, dark suits, moving with terrifying precision. Emerging from the lead car is an older patriarch with silver hair and a jagged scar bisecting his heavy brow. Daisy has never seen him, yet he projects the exact same suffocating gravity as the bleeding man she stitched together. He adjusts his red silk tie and delivers a single icy nod. Immediately, the 12 enforcers march toward the glass doors like an inevitable execution squad. Daisy stands absolutely paralyzed by dread as the crushing truth dawns on her. The man she saved was Mafia royalty. The universe offers a very bitter lesson here. Our smallest choices always ripple outward, and sometimes one simple act of mercy drags you screaming into the crosshairs of a waking nightmare. The wounded heir was true underworld royalty, and Daisy is only just waking up to the vast scale of her nightmare. She remains glued to the cracked concrete as the bitter wind slices her thin jacket. Behind her, the city bus rolls to a stop, air brakes hissing loudly to offer a perfect, fleeting escape. Yet, her worn sneakers refuse to move. You and I must confront a sobering truth here. When a shadow this massive eclipses your entire life, running away only prolongs the hunt. Eventually, you have to turn around and look the storm in the eye. She watches the terrifying masterclass in domination unfold. 2 suited enforcers anchor themselves by the idling engines, hands hovering over concealed steel, scanning the bleak rooftops. 4 more fan out, securing every single blind spot. The perimeter is flawlessly and tragically sealed. The silver-haired boss oozes a calm, suffocating authority, stepping smoothly through the glass diner doors as 6 enforcers shadow his exact rhythm. Daisy watches from the pavement, her chest heaving with sharp, frantic gasps. Every instinct screams at her to climb onto that bus and vanish. But if this syndicate is here to scorch the earth, running turns her into hunted prey. Even worse, that petty manager keeps an employee ledger in his desk, listing her tiny apartment and the exact hospital wing where her brother rests. The hardest truth we ever swallow is that true bravery is never the absence of fear. It is the agonizing choice to walk back into a burning building for the person you love. Swallowing the bile in her throat, she refuses to let them touch her family. Daisy spins around and sprints directly back into the jaws of the beast. She creeps up to the frog plate glass window, pressing her trembling shoulder against the freezing brickfoot to witness the scene. The diner is a desolate stage, occupied only by Higgins and the morning waitress. The poor girl is pressed deep into a corner booth, shaking violently, clutching a coffee pot like a pathetic shield. And Higgins, the petty tyrant who berates people over spilled sugar, his arrogant soul has completely evaporated. He is glued to the cash register, his sweaty skin turned a sickening, chalky gray. As he stares at the phantom army dismantling his tiny kingdom, the silver-haired Dawn glides to the center of the linoleum floor. There is a deeply satisfying lesson in watching a bully break. Those who scream the loudest to enforce their pathetic power are always the very first to weep when a true predator enters the room. Notice how a genuine predator never needs to raise his voice. He does not scream or brandish steel like an amateur. He simply exists, radiating a heavy dread that sucks the oxygen straight out of your lungs. Mr. Gregory Higgins, the patriarch purrs, the syllables dripping with a velvet cadence. I am Domenico Moradi. I represent certain interests. Higgins is leaking cold sweat, frantically wiping his greasy palms on his apron. I pay my dues. Detective Miller gets his envelope every month. Domenico gifts him a polite, paralyzing smile. Detective Miller is indisposed. He suffered a tragic, fatal heart attack in his patrol car an hour ago. Outside the glass, Daisy covers her mouth. The corrupt cop is already a corpse. We must accept a grim reality. The debts of the wicked are always paid in fresh blood, and dirty money buys no true mercy. Let you and I step into the cold glare of this dying room. The corrupt detective is already a ghost, erased before dawn. The wounded king has kept his dark promise. Domenico approaches the scratched counter, his shadow stretching long. I am not here to collect an envelope, Mr. Higgins, he murmurs. A soldier drops a black briefcase onto the formica. The clasps crack open like a gunshot, revealing flawless stacks of $100 bills. My employer wishes to purchase this establishment, he states, sliding a contract beside the cash. Here is a quiet truth we all must learn. When massive wealth and ruthless violence walk in holding hands, the illusion of choice evaporates. You never negotiate with an earthquake. You only brace yourself and pray to survive it. Here is $500,000. Which is far more than this grease trap is worth. Sign the deed, take the bag, and catch a noon flight. Never show your face in Chicago again. The camera holds on Higgins. His vision blurs as the hollow eyes of the hitman box him in. It is a brutal execution sentence dressed up as a corporate buyout. If he hesitates, he leaves this room in a body bag. Hands trembling violently, he pulls a cheap pen from his apron, frantically scratching his signature onto the dotted line. Excellent, Domenico whispers, his voice like cold silk. He snaps the briefcase shut with absolute finality. Now get out. We must remember this heavy truth in our own lives. Sometimes, mere survival demands that you lay your pride down and completely walk away. Higgins scrambles wildly over the counter, leaving his coat, and vanishes into the alley. The lens shifts to Domenico, turning his terrifying stare toward Sarah. She hyperventilates in the dim corner. Where is the blonde from the night shift? He asks. Sarah shatters. She left. Please do not kill me. Domenico exhales, exhausted by the fragile nature of ordinary people. Nobody is hurting you. Get out. We are closed. She sprints into the bitter morning air. Outside, hidden in the bruised shadows, Daisy watches. She knows if these predators hunt her in the open. She is already a ghost. She squares her tired shoulders and marches through the glass doors. The hardest lesson we learn in the dark is this. Running from your deepest fear only makes it chase you faster. Watch this tense moment with me. The second the brass bell chimes, 6 pairs of dead eyes snap toward her. The air turns to lead as rough hands drift toward the heavy steel hidden inside their coats. But Domenico merely raises one quiet finger. Instantly, the hitmen freeze like stone statues. The older man turns slowly, taking in her worn jacket and the defiant fire in her posture. Daisy Gallagher, I presume, he murmurs gently. Her heart hammers violently against her ribs. She stammers out her innocence, swearing she just pours coffee and never spoke to the police. Domenico simply offers a soft, grandfatherly chuckle that chills the room. It is a profound reminder for all of us. True, terrifying power never actually needs to raise its voice to command absolute obedience. You completely misunderstand, Domenico says, his smile carrying an unsettling warmth. We are not here to silence you. We are here to say thank you. Sweeping an elegant hand across the room, he announces that on behalf of Don Alessandro Rossi, this diner now belongs to her. Daisy turns to solid ice. That name echoes through her mind like a heavy funeral bell. This is the untouchable phantom who rules the city. Just last night, she dragged his bleeding frame into a filthy pantry and pressed towels to his wounds. Mine, she whispers, staring at the grease-stained floor she spent years scrubbing. It shows us how violently fate can pivot. A single act of unexpected compassion can completely rewrite the entire course of your life, whether you are ready to face it or not. Domenico checks an invisible watch, stating the deed will be in her name by 5. He mentions contractors are waiting to gut the interior, adding that Don Rossi demands loyalty be rewarded beyond measure. But instead of falling to her knees in gratitude, a blinding rage slices through her terror. The camera pushes in on her trembling fists. She knows the tragic reality. All the blood money on earth means nothing if it cannot fix the one thing that is truly broken in your life. Her thoughts drifted to her little brother, Leo, lying pale and helpless in a depressing hospital bed. She bleeds herself dry just to keep his monitor beeping. A fresh coat of paint on a failing diner does not heal a shattered spine, and it certainly will not save the only family she has left. The memory of a corrupt officer leaning over this counter flashes in her mind. Daisy refuses to become another pawn in a Mafia kingpin's twisted tragedy. "No," she says, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. Domenico freezes. His groomed eyebrow twitches upward in raw disbelief. Behind him, a hulking enforcer shifts his weight, confused. Nobody on this earth says no to the Rossi syndicate. When Domenico asks her to repeat herself, his polite veneer slips, revealing the cold steel beneath. Daisy holds her ground, her jaw set. She states she does not want his dirty money. She saved a man simply because he was bleeding to death, nothing more. It teaches us a vital lesson. The bravest thing a person can do is refuse a beautiful gift that comes locked inside a gilded cage. Daisy looks this terrifying figure dead in the eye, making it clear she will never belong to the mob. Domenico stares back in quiet fascination. The Don warned him this girl was a fierce spark in a pitch-black city, and now he witnesses that fire firsthand. She tells him the debt is settled. He survived, she survived, and that is where the story ends. Spinning on her worn heels, she marches directly out the glass doors. Her shoulders are tense, fully bracing for the deafening crack of a bullet in her spine. But the shot never breaks the silence. She boards the early transit and leaves that brutal life behind without a single backward glance. It is a profound realization. Sometimes the strongest armor you can wear against the darkness is simply choosing to walk away. Stick with me here, because you and I know the underworld never lets people walk away. Daisy spends 3 agonizing hours in her cramped apartment, pacing the threadbare carpet, waiting for men in suits to kick down her door. By late morning, the adrenaline drains out, leaving her nauseous. She forces herself to wash and head straight to the medical clinic. The camera captures a bleak, cinder block building that smells of harsh bleach and quiet despair. It is the only place treating her brother on her meager wages. She steps up to the desk, desperately clutching her frayed checkbook. True devotion is rarely found in grand gestures. Real love is dragging your broken self forward for the people you cherish. Even when your own soul is exhausted and terrified, the crushing monthly bill is due today. It is a sum she cobbled together from loose tips and the blood-stained cash the Don left behind. Her stomach twists at the thought of using tainted Mafia money, but her brother's survival demands this tragic sacrifice. She approaches the tired nurse, behind the scratched plexiglass, asking to pay the balance for room 214. The nurse taps the keyboard, delivering a shocking blow. Leo is no longer in that room. The stale air completely leaves Daisy's lungs. The sterile hallway begins to spin as pure panic takes hold. Did the syndicate take him as twisted revenge for her defiance? When the fragile ground falls out from under you, always brace yourself. Life has a cruel habit of delivering its deepest cuts exactly when you think you are safe. Seeing the color drain from Daisy's face, the nurse hurries to stop her panic. Her brother is perfectly fine. He was transferred to the top floor, to the private luxury suites reserved for the city's elite. Daisy stands frozen, her mind violently short-circuiting. That wing costs thousands of dollars a week. The nurse points to the monitor, revealing an impossible truth. A massive wire transfer cleared at 8 in the morning. The suffocating medical debt is wiped clean. Every past surgery and the new suite are paid in full. It is a terrifying, calculated display of endless power. A heavy truth to swallow in this life is this: when a dangerous stranger hands you a beautiful miracle wrapped in gold, you can be absolutely certain there is a heavy iron chain permanently attached to it. Daisy grips the counter, her voice a whisper as she asks who paid the bill. The nurse offers a sweet smile, playfully calling the donor a guardian angel. But you and I both know the dark reality. Daisy does not feel blessed. She feels like a helpless animal stepping onto a hidden steel trap. She rides the silent elevator to the top floor, her scuffed boots sinking into plush carpets that smell of lavender instead of harsh chemicals. Pushing open the heavy mahogany door, the sprawling room steals her breath. Her young brother rests in a high-tech bed, looking more peaceful than he has in agonizing years. Always listen to the quiet warnings in your own soul. When sudden salvation feels entirely too flawless, you can bet the devil is waiting patiently in the shadows. Let the camera pan slowly across the sterile hospital room, lingering on a crystal vase blooming with 24 immaculate white roses. Leo is glowing, looking more alive than he has in weeks. He chatters happily about the rich meals, completely blind to the invisible noose tightening around them. Daisy forces a smile, choking down the bitter taste of raw panic to press a soft kiss against his forehead. But as she pulls back, her hollow eyes snag on those perfect flowers. Hidden deep within the arrangement sits a heavy, midnight black envelope. Her fingers shake violently as she reaches for it, snapping the thick wax seal. The universe operates on a cruel scale. We must remember that every beautiful, unearned luxury demands a terrifying price, and the debt collector always arrives exactly when you are the most helpless. The camera pulls in tight on the heavy parchment. The ink is sharp, bleeding with a ruthless elegance. The message leaves absolutely no room to breathe. A debt is only cleared when he says it is cleared, and he is coming for his little bird tonight. At the bottom, 2 letters are scrawled. Our Daisy crushes the thick paper inside her sweating palm. She actually believed she could walk away from this nightmare. But Alejandro is a predator who knows exactly how to weaponize desperation. By paying for her brother to breathe, he quietly bought her soul. The exhausted diner waitress is gone forever. She is now glued to the center of a very dark, inescapable web. It is a tragic reality we often ignore. Sometimes the heaviest chains dragging us downward are forged entirely from the people we love the most. The remaining daylight bleeds away, feeling exactly like sand pouring from a broken hourglass. Daisy paces the floor of her cramped apartment. The silence is deafening compared to the hum of that billionaire medical wing. Every creak of the cheap floorboards drives a cold spike of panic directly into her ribs. She traces a dozen escape routes in her mind. But the walls keep closing in. She cannot run. Alejandro guaranteed that the second he funded her brother's survival. It is a brilliant, agonizing snare. If she disappears, Leo loses his care, and the syndicate hunts her anyway. Look, you and I know the profound truth of this situation. Love is meant to be our greatest anchor, but when a monster holds the other end of the chain, it quickly becomes an inescapable death trap. The harsh bulb casts shadows across Daisy's face as she stares into the cracked mirror, seeing a fractured reflection of a woman drafted into a silent war. Slowly, she slips into a stark black dress, kept exclusively for funerals. Tonight, the dark fabric acts as emotional armor. She pulls her hair into a tight knot and scrubs her face clean, refusing to play the part of a pretty companion. She is a prisoner. At 7:30 sharp, a heavy fist rattles her door. She smooths her trembling hands down her sides and leans into the peephole. The man waiting is not Alejandro. It is a hulking shadow in a navy suit, sporting a shattered nose and dead eyes. We must always prepare for the harsh reality of the battlefield, refusing to buy into the polite illusions an enemy tries to sell. The heavy door groans open. The giant stands on the mat, his voice a low rumble as he introduces himself as Carlo. The boss wants her, and he is here to collect. Daisy forces her chin up. Her legs feel like shifting sand, yet she demands to know what happens if she refuses. Carlo does not blink. He states that the boss enjoys polite invitations, but is perfectly happy to use brute force. He advises her to walk quietly, if only to spare the innocent family sleeping next door. It is a blood-soaked promise from a violent world. Daisy swallows hard, grabs her coat, and locks the door on her old life forever. The lessons here demands quiet wisdom. True courage is not always a fiery rebellion. Sometimes bravery is looking at an unwinnable fight and choosing to play the dark game just to survive. Let us unpack the visual imagery of this sequence together. Down on the pavement, a massive armored sedan waits with the engine purring. The glass is pitch black, creating a rolling fortress. Carlo pulls the door wide, and Daisy sinks into the plush leather. The cabin air is thick, smelling of rich cedar and the ghost of expensive cigars. Then comes the sound. That reinforced door slams shut with the finality of a coffin lid, severing her from the normal world. Outside the window, cheap neon lights blur into sprawling estates, where old money hides the ugliest sins. The tragedy of this moment is crystal clear. Boundless wealth can construct the most breathtaking mansions, but those walls often become the coldest, most inescapable prisons a human being could ever suffer. The armored car slows near the iron gates of the manor. The Gothic estate looms over a pitch-black lake, isolated from the city. It is a fortress built to keep ordinary people shut out. Security cameras trace the vehicle like cold eyes as the gates groan open. Tires crunch over the cobblestone driveway before stopping at the towering front steps. When Daisy steps out into the night, the biting wind and the psychological weight of the property press down on her chest. Two armed guards in tailored suits stand by the mahogany entrance. They do not speak. They simply step apart, clearing the path into the belly of the beast. We must always remember this. No matter how stunning the architecture may be, a gilded cage is still a cage, designed by a monster specifically to consume the innocent. The interior features crystal chandeliers and priceless paintings, yet the air feels utterly suffocating. Do not let the beauty fool you. Every inch of this perfection was bought with spilled blood. Daisy slowly climbs the sweeping staircase. Her worn shoes sink deep into plush rugs, absorbing her footsteps into absolute silence. At the end of the corridor, heavy oak doors sit slightly ajar. A warm, golden glow bleeds out into the dark hallway, accompanied by the mournful weeping of a vintage classical record. She pushes the wood open and crosses the threshold directly into the predator's den. The truth hidden in this frame is vital. Real corruption is rarely ugly on the surface. It wraps itself in the finest silk, hiding pure moral rot behind a beautiful mask of staggering wealth. The camera widens to reveal a cavernous library. A fire roars in the stone hearth, casting frantic shadows across the walls. Standing by the window, staring at the black water, is Alejandro. The bloody clothes are gone, replaced by a crisp white shirt. The sleeves are rolled up, exposing the dark ink on his forearms. He gently swirls a crystal glass of amber bourbon. Even while favoring his fresh gunshot wound, he moves with a terrifying panther-like grace. He does not turn around when she enters. His deep voice bounces off the bookshelves, casually praising her punctuality. That sound drags a blade of ice right down her spine. The lesson here is entirely about survival. When you find yourself locked in a room with a dangerous wolf, you must never let the animals see your hands shaking. You and I can feel the crushing gravity of this standoff. Imagine being trapped by a man who entirely owns your future. Daisy glares at his broad back. Her voice comes out tight, insisting that saving his life was not a choice. Alejandro finally turns. The firelight flickers across his sharp features, his dark eyes pinning her in place. He takes a slow sip of liquor, letting his heavy gaze drag down her black funeral dress. His voice is a low rumble when he tells her there is always a choice. He stalks closer, bringing the suffocating scent of sandalwood and danger. He quietly reminds her that she chose to hide him. She chose to lie. The life lesson here cuts very deep. Every action we take is a deliberate choice, even when the universe forces us to pick between two terrifying nightmares. Watch his body language. Lethal tension hardens his jawline. A raw power is coiled just beneath his calm surface. But Daisy refuses to shatter. Every instinct screams at her to bolt, yet she roots her shoes into the carpet. She declares she never wanted his blood money keeping her brother alive. A terrifying flash of malice darkens his eyes. He invades her space, leaning in so close she can feel his body heat. His voice drops to a deadly whisper, warning her never to confuse his investments with charity. He calls her his little bird, but Daisy fires back, eyes blazing. She is just a waitress trying to survive, and he brought his syndicate war into her diner. The wisdom here is carved in stone. Staring the devil down and holding your ground is often the only way to protect your soul. You can see Daisy unraveling, the panic cracking her facade. She begs him to let her go, promising his secrets will die with her. Then he does the unthinkable. Alejandro reaches out. His scarred hand gently catches a stray curl, tucking it behind her ear. That tender touch is absolutely paralyzing, coming from a killer who ends lives with a casual nod. Daisy freezes into solid ice. He lowers his face to hers, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, and completely shatters her world. He reveals that the corrupt detective did not act alone. Daisy stumbles backward, her voice breaking as she begs for the truth. He simply turns his back, walking toward his oak desk. The lesson is chilling. The most ruthless monsters always hide a deeply calculated, dangerous motive behind every gentle touch. The heavy thud of the folder against mahogany shatters the quiet room. Grainy photographs spill outward like cursed cards. We watch Daisy inch forward, her breath catching in her throat. There she is, wiping tables. There she is, shivering at the midnight bus stop. And there, entering the hospital just hours ago. The lighting feels suddenly cold as Alejandro reveals the terrifying truth. The corrupt officer was merely a hunting dog for the Falcone syndicate. The assassination was a calculated power grab. All the warmth drains from her cheeks as the suffocating reality finally takes hold. Ignorance is truly a gentle blanket, because discovering that ruthless men are actively hunting you in the shadows is a waking nightmare you can never escape. Alejandro leans against the edge of his desk, dissecting her new reality with surgical precision. He explains that the rival family has already dispatched their ghosts to retrace the failed hit. They know he bled out on her diner floor. They know she was working the late shift, and they know the officer left with empty hands. Picking up the hospital photo, he delivers the psychological death blow. To the Falcones, she is no longer just a girl pouring coffee. She is a loose thread that must be cut. By choosing mercy and saving a dying man, she accidentally wandered onto a blood-soaked chessboard. The brutal lesson here is impossible to ignore. Sometimes, doing the morally righteous thing will drag you head first into a vicious war you are entirely unprepared to fight. Daisy grips the desk so tightly. Her knuckles fade to bone white. Her voice trembles as she forces out the heavy question, asking if they are going to kill her. Alejandro steps into her space, his dark eyes carrying a lethal sense of possession. He spares her no illusions. They will not just eliminate her. They will drag her innocent brother directly into the crossfire. That is why the boy is already secured in a private hospital wing under a fabricated name. The room seems to tilt off its axis. Her simple life of late rent is officially dead. Stick with me here, because you and I both know the tragic irony of this moment. We constantly complain about our mundane routines, but you must always appreciate the boring days. Because your entire world can shatter in a single heartbeat. Tears of despair spill over her lashes as she hurls the blame squarely at him. Alejandro does not flinch. Standing like a monolith in the dim light, he delivers a brutal reality check. He is the only reason she is still drawing breath. Had she surrendered him to the police, the rivals would have burned her diner to ash, with her locked inside. Stepping closer, his shadow envelops her trembling frame. He admits a dark respect for her independence. But in this underworld, independence is a fatal illusion. When her fractured voice asks what he truly wants, he leans in. He wants her exactly where he can see her. The hard truth we all eventually learn is that pride acts as a beautiful suit of armor, right up until it becomes the heavy iron that drags you under the dark water. His proposition hangs heavily in the tense room. He demands she move into his fortress estate, flanked by armed guards 24 hours a day. She must stand by his side at public events, playing the role of his property to ward off vicious rivals. A sharp, bitter laugh escapes Daisy. She challenges him, asking if he expects her to play the obedient mistress, wielding his real name like a jagged blade. A slow, predatory smirk graces his features. Whispering into the quiet air, he assures her she will be a guest, not a mistress, reminding her of the brilliant fire she used to outsmart the police. Life has a funny way of testing us. The moments where we feel the absolute weakest and most trapped are often the exact moments we prove how truly unbreakable our spirits really are. He calls her a rare spark in a dark world. Metal rings sharply as he slides a platinum key card across the mahogany desk. His tone shifts to cold authority, noting her belongings have already been relocated to the east wing of his mansion. In exchange, her brother will receive the absolute best medical care. We watch Daisy stare at the gleaming card, the invisible walls closing in around her throat. She could run, but the hounds are already tracking her. Now, the devil himself is offering a gilded cage. Slowly, her trembling fingers reach out, dragging the cold metal closer. Survival is a bitter pill. Sometimes, to protect the fragile people you love, you have no choice but to shake hands with the devil just to keep worse monsters away from your door. The platinum card rests in Daisy's palm, heavy and freezing like a shard of winter ice. The camera pushes in close as her chin tilts upward. The terror that used to cloud her eyes hardens into something unbreakable. The era of playing the helpless victim is officially over. She agrees to stand as his living shield against the Falcone family. But then the rhythm shifts. She has a condition. A rare flicker of shock crosses Alejandro's granite features. Nobody negotiates with the boss. Yet Daisy steps right into his space, holding his dangerous gaze. If she is going to wear a target on her back, she demands to learn how to shoot. The lesson here is written in cold iron. When life forces you into a deadly arena, you must demand the exact weapons you need to fight your way back out. Let us look closely at the shift in atmosphere. 3 weeks later, we pan across the bleak firing range buried beneath his sprawling manor. The air is thick, smelling of sharp gunpowder and the dark spice of his cologne. Daisy has traded her faded diner uniform for the sleek silk of a gilded cage. She stands at the firing line, knuckles white as she grips a black Glock 19. His low baritone vibrates through her headset, warning her that her stance is too rigid. Before she can draw a breath, his solid chest presses against her spine. His calloused hands glide over hers, firmly correcting her grip. Growth always demands that we step into the unknown. Sometimes, you have to let the person who intimidates you guide your hands until you learn how to protect yourself. The silence between them is heavy with tension. His warm breath brushes her neck, sending a dangerous thrill down her spine that has nothing to do with fear. He speaks right into her ear, a low rumble, telling her to lean into the cold steel and never let the weapon control her. Daisy exhales a shaky breath and squeezes the trigger. The gunshot shatters the quiet, striking the target dead center. Alejandro murmurs soft praise and steps away, leaving a sudden chill where his heat just was. He notes how fast she learns. Daisy drops a freezing reply, stating that survival is a brilliant motivator. She clears the chamber with smooth precision and turns to face him. True confidence is only born when we confront and master the exact things that used to paralyze us in the dark. Over these weeks, the unspoken pull between them has become a suffocating weight. She was brought here as a captive alibi, yet the cold boundaries of this manor are melting. His quiet possessiveness makes her pulse race. But you and I know the quiet days are over. Alejandro studies her, announcing that tonight is the ultimate test. They are walking into the fire at a lavish charity ball at the Palmer House Hilton. Chicago's corrupt elite will be watching, including the man hunting her, Lorenzo Falcone. Daisy swallows the fear burning in her throat. We can hide and build our walls in the safety of the shadows all we want, but sooner or later, the music starts, and we are forced to step into the blinding spotlight, to look our biggest demons right in the eye. A tremor shakes Daisy's voice as she asks if the rival boss will take the bait. Alejandro retrieves a velvet box from the shadows. It snaps open, revealing a blinding diamond and sapphire choker. He explains that Falcone believes he can win by destroying whatever belongs to the Rossi family. Alejandro steps close, the freezing stones settling against her collarbone. His rough knuckles brush her warm skin as he fastens the clasp. He orders her to stay close, smile, and remember that she bows to no one. Hours later, Daisy steps from the bulletproof Maybach into a chaotic flash of cameras. The truth of this world is simple. When forced to walk into a room full of starving wolves, you must hold your head high and convince every single one of them that you hold the leash. Picture the opening frame of this scene. Daisy commands the room in a midnight blue silk gown. Diamonds at her throat violently catch the camera flashes. Alessandro steps to her side, his pressing against her lower back, radiating cold authority. As they enter the ballroom of Chicago's elite parts for them, whispers ripple through the crowd as the notorious Don Rossi brings a woman into the light. For an hour, the grand illusion holds. Daisy plays the untouchable queen, offering calculated smiles to corrupt men. But peace is fragile glass. The performance shatters when a panicked politician corners Alessandro near a towering ice sculpture. A gentle reminder for us all. No matter how flawless your armor appears, unexpected chaos is always waiting quietly in the shadows. Let us pan across the room, you and I, where the air hums with quiet desperation. A politician corners Alessandro, begging for 5 miserable minutes. Notice the dangerous tremor in Alessandro's jaw. He commands Daisy to stay anchored. She tilts her champagne flute, offering a flawless nod. But the absolute second the oak doors swallow him, the camera pushes in on her fracturing composure. She stares at an oil canvas, trying to cage her racing pulse. She finally exhales. Then a silken whisper grazes her ear, mocking her past pouring cheap diner coffee. A man steps from the marble shadows, pristine in a white tuxedo. The lesson here is deeply tragic. The precise second you drop your heavy armor to breathe is exactly when the deadliest predators slither from the tall grass. The harsh light hits Lorenzo Falcone. His eyes are glacial, perfectly reflecting the monster of their nightmares. 2 enforcers drift into the frame to eclipse her from his gaze, but Daisy holds her mark. She projects a chilling authority, pretending she has never heard his name. Lorenzo barks a grating laugh, brushing her off as a stray mutt. Then he delivers the verbal blade. He casually asks about her little brother, Leo, in hospital room 501. The heavy diamonds at Daisy's throat transform into a suffocating noose. Her blood turns to frost. Lorenzo leans close, mocking Alessandro's attempt to hide the boy. Life carries a heavy truth. When a demon wants to shatter your soul, they bypass your own chest and aim directly at the innocent people you cherish the most. The memory of the diner fades into this opulent nightmare. Lorenzo leans into the frame, delivering a sickening ultimatum. His hitmen are breaching the hospital at this very second. Her brother only lives if she quietly follows him to the elevators. Lorenzo wears a smug grin, anticipating a total psychological break. He waits for the desperate pleading, the surrender to the slaughterhouse. But notice the subtle shift in her posture. Daisy has not been a trembling waitress since she scrubbed syndicate blood from her floors. Instead of a breakdown, she raises her flute, taking a deliberately slow, icy sip of champagne. We must always remember this simple lesson. Never mistake a humble beginning for enduring weakness. The cornered creature in the dark might just be a fierce predator waiting to strike. Examine the exact frame where the prey transforms. Daisy holds Lorenzo's icy gaze. The terror he expects is completely missing. Instead, her pupils dilate with a dark rush of pure adrenaline. Deliberately, her hand vanishes into the high silk slit of her gown. Her fingers curl around the cold steel strapped to her thigh. She drops her voice into a lethal register, a chilling mirror of the Mafia king she loves. She asks if he honestly believes he is the first ghost to threaten her blood. Lorenzo's arrogant smirk visibly cracks. She steps directly into his breathing space, exposing his catastrophic miscalculation. The lesson is profound. When someone you categorized as fragile suddenly invades your space with quiet authority, the psychological war is already completely lost. A cold shadow falls over her face. Without a tremor, she informs him this strike was anticipated hours ago. Watch closely as Lorenzo's untouchable aura shatters. The blood drains from his face. He spits out a frantic accusation, claiming she is a desperate liar. Daisy merely blinks, her gaze piercing right through his chest. She dares his towering enforcer to make the call. The heavy silence as the brute dials, the phone becomes an excruciating psychological torture. Then the giant's face contorts into raw horror. With a trembling jaw, he mutters that Alessandro's right hand answered the line. Their hitmen are already dead in the dirt. This teaches us a brutal life lesson. Never march against a brilliant strategist without first ensuring your own walls are completely impenetrable. Lorenzo loses his grip on reality, screaming wildly for his guard to seize her. But Daisy has discarded the script of the helpless victim. Operating on the freezing instincts of a survivor, she opens her fingers. The crystal glass plummets, shattering loudly against the polished marble. In that precise fraction of a second, she draws the compact Glock 43. Before the aggressor can pull his weapon, she aligns her sights and fires. The violent crack is partially swallowed by the string orchestra, but the visceral damage is absolute. She annihilates his kneecap, collapsing him into a screaming heap of agony as the ballroom erupts into chaos. The truth of this world is undeniable. Never force a quiet soul into a dark corner unless you are ready to bleed when they finally bite back. Picture this scene with me. Lorenzo is paralyzed, staring down the barrel of Daisy's weapon, locked on his racing heart. Her hands do not possess a single tremor. She stands as an ice queen draped in diamonds, promising that one twitch earns him a bullet. Lorenzo tries to hold his fractured pride together, sneering that a soft waitress lacks the stomach for murder. But the sweat on his brow betrays his terror. Then, a dark voice bleeds from the shadows, stating she does not have to. Alessandro Rossi steps into the light like a tragic god of vengeance. His weapon is raised, vibrating with a lethal energy that sends the guests scrambling. The lesson is ancient. If you are foolish enough to corner the queen, you must be prepared to suffer the absolute wrath of the king. Notice the most poetic beat of this sequence. Alessandro wastes no glance on Lorenzo. His dark gaze is anchored entirely on Daisy. He scans her smoking gun, the shattered crystal, and the bleeding enforcer. There is no anger in his expression. Instead, a terrifying pride washes over his face. He glides to her side, his fingers grazing her bare arm in silent worship. Only then does he turn a dead stare toward the rival boss. His voice cuts through the ringing silence, declaring he came to collect his queen, and this means checkmate. Lorenzo opens his mouth to beg, but you and I know the hour for mercy has expired. 2 deafening shots crack the air. The syndicate leader violently collapses onto the cold marble. The lesson is absolute. Make a reckless move against true power, and you will be wiped from the board. Listen closely to the sirens. In this underworld, they are nothing but a hollow cinematic soundtrack. Every uniform swarming the estate is already in Alessandro's pockets. The blood will be scrubbed, the narrative rewritten. Watch how the lighting softens as Alessandro turns to Daisy. His violent edge instantly melts into pure devotion. He gently pries the steel from her trembling fingers, engages the safety, and makes it disappear. Cupping her pale face, he softly asks if she is hurt, his voice a velvet hum worshipping his queen. Daisy stares at the lifeless rival, then meets the eyes of the devil who dragged her into the abyss, only to place a crown upon her head. We uncover a complex truth here, a partner who stands beside you in the bloodiest moments, sweeping away the wreckage, offers the rarest form of love. You and I must admit, the psychological transformation in this frame is breathtaking. The innocent waitress from the diner is gone, buried under the rubble of this violent life. In her shadow stands a ruthless queen, forged in fire. She leans her cheek into Alessandro's palm. She whispers that she is perfectly fine, declaring she is exactly where she belongs. The camera pulls back as she seals her tragic fate without an ounce of regret. Daisy proves that true survival is never about cowering from monsters in the dark. Sometimes it means staring the devil in his eyes and mastering his brutal game. The final lesson for tonight is crystal clear. If you cannot escape the villains circling your life, you might as well climb the throne and rule them all. Stick around, because this tragedy is far from over.
Detective Miller, Orr's role in the story, offers a serious lesson about corruption and the abuse of authority. Police officers are supposed to protect civilians, uphold justice, and stop violence. But Miller represents the opposite. He is a shark wearing a badge, using his position to extort businesses, threaten vulnerable people, and serve criminal interests. When he enters the diner, Daisy knows instantly that calling the police would not save her. Institutions meant to protect people become dangerous themselves. This is an important educational point. Power without ethics becomes predatory. Miller's badge gives him legitimacy, but his actions reveal moral emptiness. He is more frightening than an ordinary criminal because he hides behind the appearance of law. Daisy's decision to liberate him is not simple disobedience. It is survival in a broken system. The story encourages viewers to think critically about authority. A title, uniform, or position does not automatically make someone trustworthy. People in power must be judged by their actions, accountability, and respect for human dignity. Miller's corruption also shows how vulnerable people most when systems fail. Daisy is poor, overworked, and responsible for her brother. She cannot easily fight back against a corrupt detective, a mafia boss, or a syndicate, yet she is the one placed in the most danger. The lesson is that society must protect the powerless from those who abuse power. On a personal level, the story teaches that people should trust their instincts when authority behaves unjustly. Daisy's side survives because she sees the truth clearly. Not every person with a badge is safe, and not every person outside the law is the immediate threat in front of you.